I started this piece, this Ember State, as a way to look at the role of sex and sexuality in my longtime work with tradition and sound, a way of sort of squarely looking at that part. And through the process of working, I discovered it was really this place, and particularly in the work that I do with sound, this place as a source of sound, and this place as a interior, a kind of technology almost through which to process tradition. So it became this machine inside that let me look at everything differently, let me turn everything around, and ultimately shred the tradition into microbits, into these fragments that are now just material, just freed as material that can open up into substance and into space, physical space, psychic space, acoustic space. And I call this place the Pussy for a variety of reasons. More than vagina or vulva, the pussy seems to encompass the charges around it, the cultural inheritances, as well as the sexual, fleshy reality. And there's something about letting the tradition, making, demanding the tradition kind of face the fleshy reality that felt really potent and productive. So there's two forms of this Ember State right now. The first is, this excerpt is something that I'm working on right now, a kind of pure sound, pure voice version of the inside to inside, in a sense, through the darkness, through the medium of darkness. And the other form, where we started and what was really important, is the scene form, with light, with flesh, with material, with space. So it's taking these two directions right now, you could say, that are part of the same whole. So the first thing I want to show you is an image of the space. So this is the second floor of this building, Asia Society's Aran Gallery. And we chose the small gallery. I chose the small gallery immediately when we toured spaces in the building as the container for the work. The size is not so far, something like that. And so the sense of the container, the sense of container was very important, and also the sense of being able to, the listening of the audience is how the sound is motored. The voice comes from the listening as much as it comes from the inside. The relationship between inside and outside is central to this work, the complicated relationship of inside and outside, the sometimes porous, sometimes colliding, the sensations that happen there as the interface, the way the pussy is a membrane of potential interfacing, and the way the voice is that same kind of membrane, actually. So we made that into space. And you could see the door is there. I'm inside most of the time with one small PA inside. And outside on the landing, my collaborator, Cenk Ergun, who is a composer who writes chamber music and is also an electronic musician that performs on 2 software instruments that he designed in the Max environment, real-time processing and also sample processing.
Speaking of juxtaposition, I think we've had to find bridges for connection between, even before this piece, where all 3 of us are working together. Samita and I have been playing for about a year, pretty regularly. Before there was much talk of this piece, we were improvising on our own and creating recordings.
So we put Cenk outside the doors on the landing. And I'm mostly inside of the small gallery. And Cenk is moving sound between the small PA inside and the large PA outside as the piece progresses. These are ceremonial bells, different sizes, ceremonial Hindu bells that are used in pujas and ceremonies. And Cenk does something quite magical with them through his technology, through his transparent technology, which is another parallel. So the first fragment piece that's sort of designing the space, Cenk is playing these bells. And we're working across a closed door, so he's monitoring me through something like this. That's not being used for amplification, but it's being used for him to hear me. And so we're learning how to play together and sense each other across this barrier, which is very interesting. So here's just an example of some of Cenk's sound world with these bells. Another layer of this work is a Hindu myth that, for me, was a way to connect the personal exploration with a kind of larger psychic world that informs the personal exploration, and that is the Hindu myth of Sati. Co-director Dean Moss, who's also visual designer of the work, has been vital since the inception of the work, and particularly as a conversant around the psychic debris that surrounds the work and that we carry in the form of this myth and how that rippled out. Dean, from another cultural perspective, had a way of helping me kind of distill what was important about the myth to what was at stake in the work and what was not. It's so huge. Once you start entering that, it can really swallow you. So to share a few things about Sati from the perspective of this ember state, she was the first being to be born of sex, of pleasure, not dutiful sex, which many beings before her were born from, and not of the mind, but from pleasure, which there's not actually a word for in Hindi, I learned. Sexual pleasure. There's a word for like fun, masti. But I was speaking to somebody and yeah, that word doesn't quite exist. The second thing about her is that she sacrifices herself, and she does so by setting herself on fire by the heat of her own concentration and by the heat of her mind. And before disappearing, she becomes, well, she disappears and then she becomes everything. She becomes omnipresent. So she exists at this sort of extreme brink between nothing, zero, and everything, which is a very popular formulation of the female in the Indian psyche. And finally, the third thing to know, a potent symbol about Sati is her calcified body was sliced up, different parts fell into different places that became holy places, and the last thing to fall was her ashen vulva. And so this symbol, upon a rock. And so this symbol was very potent to me, kind of haunted, and informed some of this work. So sharing things in progress with Dean Moss, pieces, sketches of flesh, body, sound work, Dean conceived of a pile of charcoal chunks, which is inside of the room. And you see the image of, I guess, on the one-pager. So if this were the room, and this were the door, and Cenk is outside over there, the charcoal chunks are just here, a big pile on the ground. And it's facing diagonal, so it's facing the door. So for this next sort of central core image of the work is where this becomes the throne and the pyre. And my pussy is facing a kind of monumental sound that Cenk is making outside in the large PA that comes from a single diaphragmatic breath. He took that sound and made it into this symphony, because that's what Cenk does. The nakedness that's so important in this work opens through the material of the coal and through the voice. So the revelation really is multiple. And the darkening, which was a beautiful discovery of material during the course of the residency, feels really important to the work. The idea of dark matter and all that we think we see and think we understand, and all that we actually don't understand that's doing the secret work of the universe, has been a really important imagination space and a really important guide to thinking about this interior space also. And the connection between the pussy and that felt really strong. And we use the doors as a kind of threshold and sound opener and closer. And I'll play one last piece of Cenk's work in the piece, kind of a dream of Sati's, where she dreams she conjures Shiva through Cenk's solo, Shiva, her lover. And Cenk here you heard me recite the Hindi alphabet at the start of the work, which I think of as these kind of ruins. It's a whole other story, but it's a less object-oriented history than it is text and sound-oriented. So these vessels Cenk takes and makes some magic with here in Shiva's voice.